Everyone thought they knew the truth that night. They saw me standing there, crossing a line I swore I'd never approach, and they saw the look on my husband's face as he turned without a word and walked away. What they didn't see was the storm that had been brewing long before that moment, the silent injustices, the buried betrayals, the weight of choices no one should ever be forced to carry. His exit wasn't just silence. It was judgment, punishment, and a goodbye that cut deeper than any shouted accusation ever could. I never imagined betrayal could begin so quietly, hidden beneath the thin veneer of everyday life. My name is Amelia, and until that night, I believed my marriage to Daniel was strong enough to withstand anything. We had been together for 7 years, and to anyone looking from the outside, we were steady, reliable, and enviably happy. Our lives were carefully curated, photos from vacations, family dinners filled with laughter, social gatherings where we blended seamlessly into the background as the perfect couple. But behind the curtain of perfection was a truth that only I carried in silence. The setting of our story wasn't extraordinary. We lived in a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the sound of sprinklers and children's bicycles on the pavement became the soundtrack of every day. It was safe, predictable, almost too controlled. And yet, within the walls of that house, there was a pressure I could never fully explain. Daniel was a man of discipline. He believed in rules, boundaries, and loyalty above all else. To him, trust wasn't something earned, it was a standard expected from the moment he gave his word. He was respected, even admired, for the way he carried himself. But in private, that expectation of loyalty became suffocating. Every decision, every movement I made, was measured against an invisible yardstick. I was never accused, never confronted, but I always knew the silent weight of being observed, evaluated, and silently judged. That weight grew heavier when whispers began swirling around his workplace, whispers of racial discrimination that no one dared speak aloud in open rooms. Daniel, one of the few black managers at his firm, faced obstacles at every turn. Promotions slipped past him. Projects he spearheaded were reassigned to others. And yet, he carried it with a calm mask, swallowing each injustice because he believed that endurance was his shield. But endurance comes at a price. He never shared the depth of his frustration, never confessed how deeply it hurt him to be excluded and underestimated. Instead, he carried that pain into our home, where silence replaced laughter and rigid routines replaced affection. I became the keeper of his unspoken wounds, trapped in a role that demanded unwavering support without ever offering me a space to breathe. And somewhere along the way, I started to unravel. The betrayal didn't begin with another person. It began with exhaustion, emotional, physical, spiritual. I wanted to help him carry the burden, but the more he retreated into silence, the more I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. Nights spent waiting for him to open up turned into nights spent alone with my thoughts. Days filled with careful gestures, dinners prepared, words chosen gently, were met with curt nods or distracted stares. I convinced myself I was overreacting, that my loneliness was selfish compared to the battles he faced outside our home. But loneliness has a way of eroding even the strongest intentions. And when temptation appeared, it didn't come crashing into my life like a storm. It slipped in quietly, disguised as understanding, as relief. It wasn't love, not even desire at first. It was simply being seen again, being heard, being more than the silent supporter of a man who refused to share his own pain. That night, when everyone saw me cross the line, they didn't see the years of silence that came before. They didn't see the sacrifices, the compromises, the aching desire to be more than invisible. They only saw the surface, the woman who failed, and the man who left without a word. But betrayal is never just about a single choice. It's a story written long before the final chapter unfolds. The unraveling began long before anyone noticed. Daniel's colleagues dismissed him quietly at work, his contributions swallowed by louder voices. At home, he withdrew deeper into himself. His silence was not peaceful, it was a fortress. A wall so high I could no longer reach him. And in that emptiness, I found myself drifting. The man who offered me an escape wasn't extraordinary. He was a colleague from my own workplace, someone who listened when Daniel no longer did. He asked questions about my day, noticed when I looked tired, and, most dangerously, made me feel like I mattered. At first, it was harmless. Coffee breaks, small exchanges that brightened otherwise colorless days. But soon, those moments became the highlights of my week. I told myself I wasn't betraying Daniel. After all, I wasn't crossing physical boundaries. But emotional betrayal often begins long before physical lines are crossed. I knew it, yet I justified every step because it felt like survival. The tension grew unbearable in our home. Daniel returned later and later, his silence thicker, his frustration sharper though never spoken aloud. Our conversations shrank to practical exchanges, bills, schedules, responsibilities. The man I married had become a ghost living in the same house, and I began to resent his refusal to let me in. I wanted to scream at him, to demand that he share his pain, to tell him I was drowning too. But I remained silent, just as he did, until the silence between us became a chasm neither of us dared to cross. It was in that void that I slipped further into danger. My colleague's presence became intoxicating, a reminder of what it felt like to be alive, to be valued. And though I knew I was walking a dangerous path, part of me wanted to be caught. Part of me wanted Daniel to notice, to care enough to pull me back. But Daniel didn't notice. Or perhaps he did and chose not to see. His focus remained fixed on his battles, his silence his shield. And so, the distance grew until one night, under the weight of loneliness and resentment, I crossed the line. What everyone saw that night wasn't planned. It was a gathering, a party with laughter and drinks, where the careful lines of propriety blurred. My colleague was there, and so was Daniel. In a moment that should never have happened, I let my exhaustion, my hunger for connection, drag me into a reckless decision. And Daniel saw it. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply turned, his face unreadable, and walked away. That silence was worse than any outburst could have been. It was the silence of finality. In the days that followed, I replayed that moment endlessly. The way Daniel's shoulders stiffened, the way his steps carried him out of the room without hesitation, the way his silence echoed louder than any scream. I wanted him to confront me, to demand explanations, to give me a chance to pour out the years of buried loneliness. But he didn't. Instead, his absence became a second betrayal. Not of faithfulness, but of partnership. He left without giving me the chance to be heard, to explain, to confess that what he saw was only the surface of something far deeper. And yet, I couldn't deny my guilt. Betrayal is betrayal, no matter the justification. I had crossed a line, one I could never uncross. The tension of that night spread like wildfire through our community. Everyone had seen enough to draw their own conclusions. To them, I was the villain. To them, Daniel was the wounded hero. And perhaps they were right. But no one wanted to know the truth, that betrayal is rarely one-sided. That silence can wound just as deeply as action. The weight of judgment crushed me. I became the subject of whispers, the target of stares. Daniel, meanwhile, withdrew further, his silence transforming into absence. He didn't come home. He didn't call. He vanished into the same quiet he had always chosen, leaving me to drown in the consequences of both our choices. Looking back now, I understand that betrayal is never as simple as the moment people witness. It is written long before, in the choices we fail to make, the words we fail to speak, the silences we allow to harden into walls. Daniel and I were both victims and perpetrators in different ways. He betrayed me with his silence, with his refusal to let me into the pain that consumed him. I betrayed him with my choices, with the hunger for connection that led me to cross a line I can never erase. The lesson isn't about blame. It's about recognition. Relationships are not destroyed by single moments, but by the countless unattended fractures that lead up to them. When I think of Daniel's silent exit, I realize it wasn't just about what I did. It was about everything we had failed to do for years, failed to speak, failed to share, failed to confront. His silence said everything, not just about that night, but about the years of distance that had finally collapsed under their own weight. And so I ask you, the one listening, the one watching, How many silences in your own life are you allowing to grow into betrayals? How many unspoken wounds are you carrying or forcing someone else to carry alone? Because betrayal doesn't begin the night it's witnessed. It begins in the quiet spaces we ignore until one moment makes it visible to everyone.